okra is a summer vegetable that belongs in the South. Before I moved to Oklahoma, it was not something that I was familiar with. And when you would talk to people, you get a polar opposite reaction. They either like it or they hate it. So what I'm going to do today is called stewed okra with tomatoes and cilantro. And for those people who are not fond of okra, this is not the recipe that's going to attract you to it. Well, we've done a grilled okra on the show before. Grilling, broiling, hot, short, dry heat methods of cooking will prevent some of that mucilaginous feeling, that slimy, gluey texture from coming out. But this one is going to be a moist heat method of cooking, and so even though we're going to leave the pods whole, it's still going to be kind of have some of that slimy effect, which a lot of us still like. What I've done here is I've taken 1 tablespoon of oil and half of a small onion that I've chopped up fairly well, along with a clove of garlic that's been minced, sauteed them until the onion was translucent. Then into that went about 2 tomatoes. Now I went ahead and blanched the tomatoes and peeled them and chopped them up. It doesn't have to be a real fine chop, but I wanted to get some of that broken down a little bit. But I didn't want the peels floating along separately, but if you like that, you don't mind that, that's okay. Now I'm going to add about 3 tablespoons of chopped fresh cilantro. And the thing that's going to make this different than most of the okra we've had are the seasonings that go in it. I have 1/8 of a teaspoon of cinnamon, 1/8 of a teaspoon of cumin, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of ground cloves. And these are things that are going to make the house smell like no okra dish has ever smelled before. It's really unusual for okra to have some of those seasonings in it if you're used to okra being either ordinarily stewed or fried. So this is something that's really special, really good, but really doesn't take that much time. We're also going to add about 1/4 of a teaspoon of black pepper, 1/4 to 1/2, depending on how much you like it, and some salt. I've got 1/2 a teaspoon of salt, which is optional. Now we're just going to bring those just back up to a simmer, and then to that, I'm going to add the okra. Now, as I said, the pods are whole. You need to make sure that your pods are not too mature so that they haven't gotten woody, and I'll look at that in a minute. Now, okra is also called lady's fingers, and to me, this is such a better application of a name than the other thing that we call lady fingers, which are those pieces of stubby white cake that we use in desserts. This, to me, actually looks like a lady finger, at least when your finger gets a little older and gnarled. There you can see mine. It looks a lot like a lady's finger would. We're going to put this in here, and we're going to just stir it around a little bit, and then I'm going to put the lid on it and let it simmer slowly for about 20 minutes. You need to come back and stir it every once in a while. And right now it's not hard to stir because the okra is still nice and firm. But as it begins to cook, the okra is going to soften up. So you're going to want to stir it fairly gently because you want to keep the pods intact. Now, as I said, the lid would go on there and you'd cook it for about 20 minutes over just a simmer. And then we'll finish that up. Now I mentioned that you don't want the pods to get too big because they get real woody. That's what has happened here. These are some pods from the garden that simply got too large. Now, this is probably a size that's going to be more apt to give you a quality pod. Once you get up like this, unless you have a variety that's meant to be very long, what happens is it's so woody that it's never going to tenderize and soften up during the cooking process. And so these you can dry out and use for Christmas decorations. But as far as using them for okra dishes, they just simply won't work. Now, I have one of these that's done ahead of time. After the 20 minutes has taken place, you're going to take another 3 tablespoons of fresh cilantro and sprinkle that over the top and then just stir that in. This can then be served hot, it can be served cold, it can be served warm. So once you make this up, you have a lot of options as what to do with it, as to what meal, what situation, whether it's going to go in lunch with you. It would make a really interesting lunch for somebody who is in an office. Just a lot of opportunities, a lot of things you can do with it, and such an unusual and glorious smell. I think you're really going to like this one. It's stewed okra with tomatoes and cilantro. For Oklahoma Gardening, this is Barbara Brown.